The land had a way of lying to people. From the road it looked flat and empty, like a forgotten page torn from an old map. But anyone who stepped onto it felt the weight of stories buried under dust and stone. The wind moved slow across the scrub, carrying the smell of dry earth and burned wood, and it sounded almost like breathing. Folks said nothing good came from places like this anymore. They said the West had been used up, sold off piece by piece, until all that remained were tired fences and broken promises. Oh, it was why the ranch sold for $75, the price of a cheap dinner and a tank of gas.
Ow.
No one wanted it. No one except a man who had run out of better choices. He arrived just before dusk, driving a truck that rattled like it might fall apart if pushed too hard. The paint was faded and the tires were worn thin, but it kept moving, same as he did. He stepped out, boots crunching on gravel, and took in what was now his. A sagging fence leaned toward the ground as if exhausted. The small shack near the draw had a crooked roof and a door that did not quite shut. The well was dry, or so the seller claimed, and the pasture had long ago given up pretending it could grow grass. People in town laughed when they heard about the sale. They called the place worthless, a joke, a last mistake. He did not argue. He had nothing left to prove to anyone. He had come west chasing the kind of hope men once believed in, the kind written about in old newspapers and sung in low voices by campfires. Land, space, a chance to start over where no one knew your name or your past. Life had not turned out the way he planned. Work dried up back east. Bills stacked higher than pride would allow. When the offer came for a patch of land no one wanted, he took it without asking many questions. $75 was all he had left after the truck payment and a box of canned food. It felt less like buying land and more like buying time. That first night, he made a small fire near the edge of the pasture. The sky stretched wide and clear, filled with stars sharp enough to hurt the eyes. He laid out a thin bedroll on the ground and rested his head on a folded jacket. The fire popped softly, throwing light across the dirt, and for the first time in a long while he felt something close to peace. The quiet was heavy, but it did not feel empty. It felt like waiting. Sometime before morning, he sensed movement. Not the wind, not a coyote, something slower. He opened his eyes to the glow of dying embers and saw a shape standing just beyond the firelight. At first he thought he was dreaming. Then the shape lowered its head, and the breath came out in a long, tired sound. A horse stood there, ribs showing under a dull coat, legs thin as fence posts. Its mane hung tangled and dirty, and one eye was half closed, crusted with dried tears. The animal looked less like a horse and more like a shadow that had forgotten how to leave. He did not move. He knew better than to startle a creature that big and that worn down. The horse took a few careful steps closer, drawn by warmth or smell or something else neither of them could name. It stopped just a few feet from where he lay, head low, ears flicking back and forth as if listening to a voice no one else could hear. He could see every bone in its frame.
Oh.
This was not a wild horse running free. This was a starving one, abandoned or lost, hanging on by habit alone. The old story said animals knew things about people. They could sense what kind of man you were before you ever spoke. He had never put much stock in that. Still lying there on the cold ground, watching that horse choose him over the dark, he felt something shift inside his chest. The horse did not run, did not shy away. It stood guard over him as the fire burned down to ash. By morning, the horse was gone. He woke to the pale light of dawn and the quiet call of birds. For a moment he thought the night visit had been nothing more than a dream shaped by hunger and loneliness. Then he saw the hoof prints pressed deep into the dirt near his bedroll. They circled the fire, then pointed toward the far end of the pasture where the land dipped and disappeared into brush. He stood there a long time, staring at those marks, feeling foolish for hoping the animal might still be nearby. Over the next few days, he set to work. There was not much to do, but keeping busy helped keep the doubts quiet. He patched the fence as best he could with wire scavenged from an old shed, cleaned out the shack, swept the floor, and fixed the door so it stayed shut. The well was dry, just as promised, but he found a shallow spring near the draw that still trickled water if you were patient enough to wait. Each night, he lit a fire and cooked beans from a dented pot, eating slowly while the sun slid down behind the hills. On the third evening, the horse returned. This time it did not stop at the edge of the light. It walked straight into the glow of the fire, head low, steps uneven. He could see now that one leg was swollen, the skin cracked and raw. The smell of sickness clung to it. He rose slowly, hands open, speaking in a low voice he barely recognized as his own. The horse flinched, then stood still, as if too tired to care what happened next. He had no feed, no rope, no saddle. Nothing a man was supposed to have if he planned on owning a horse. All he had was water from the spring and a piece of stale bread from his pack. He broke the bread in half and held it out. The horse sniffed it, hesitated, then took it gently from his hand. Its lips were soft, trembling. It chewed like each bite might be the last it ever got. That was how it began, not with ownership or plans or words, just two worn-out beings, sharing what little they had left. The town noticed soon enough. Someone saw the horse near the fence and spread the word. Folks drove by slow, shaking their heads. They said the horse was more trouble than it was worth. Said it would die before winter. Said the land would kill them both. He listened and said nothing. He had learned that silence was often the best answer to people who had already decided how a story would end. Each day the horse grew a little stronger. It's not much, but enough to lift its head higher, to stand a bit steadier on that bad leg. He spent hours sitting nearby, talking about nothing in particular, about the jobs he used to have, about the places he had seen, about the way life had a habit of breaking things without asking. The horse listened, ears turning, eyes calm, never tried to leave. At night, he lay by the fire and watched the stars, the horse standing close, blocking the wind. The ranch still looked worthless in the daylight. The fences still leaned. The ground was still dry and cracked, but something had changed. The land did not feel empty anymore. It felt claimed, not by a deed or a price, but by choice. What he did not know yet was why the horse had come to him. He did not know where it had escaped from, or what kind of past it carried in its scarred body. He did not know that others were already looking for it, or that the land he bought for $75 held more than dust and old boards. As the horse shifted its weight and let out a long, tired breath beside him, a distant engine sound rolled across the hills, faint but growing. He sat up, listening, heart tightening, and wondered if the choice the horse made that night by the fire was about to cost them both far more than either of them could afford. The engine's sound faded before it ever reached the fence, but the feeling it left behind stayed long after the hills went quiet again. He sat there by the fire with his back straight and his breath held, listening for anything that did not belong to the night. The horse shifted beside him, stamping once, uneasy. Whatever had passed through the dark had stirred something old in both of them. He did not know why, only that the calm he had grown used to over the last few days now felt thin, like ice before a break. Morning came slow. A pale sun lifted over the ridge, casting long shadows across the pasture. The horse stood where it always did now, close enough that he could reach out and touch its neck. The coat was still rough, but there was more life in its eyes than there had been before. He filled a cracked tin with water from the spring and watched as the horse drank deeply, the muscles in its throat working hard. It drank like it had learned not to trust the next chance would come. As the days passed, small routines took shape. He walked the fence line each morning, checking for breaks. The horse followed at a distance, limping but stubborn, stopping often to rest. He spoke as he worked, not because he expected answers, but because the sound of his own voice reminded him he was still here. He told the horse about the job he lost at the mill, how the doors closed without warning, and men were handed their final pay like an apology that meant nothing. He talked about the house he could not keep, the boxes left behind in a storage unit he still owed money on. The horse listened the same way it always did, steady and quiet. It became clear the horse had once been trained. It responded to calm movements, understood when he stepped aside or held up a hand. Yet there was fear in it too, buried deep. Sudden noises made it flinch. The sound of metal clanging sent it backing away, eyes wide. Whatever life it had before this land had not been kind, and hunger was only part of that story. He found an old feed sack buried in the shed, half rotten but still holding together. He filled it with what little grain he could afford from town. Buying it meant skipping a meal for himself, but he did not hesitate. When he poured the grain out onto the dirt, the horse stood still, waiting. It did not rush. It waited for his nod before lowering its head. That small moment stayed with him longer than it should have. People from town drove by more often now. Some slowed to look. Others stopped just long enough to ask questions they did not care about the answers to. They asked where the horse came from. They warned him about sickness, about costs, about trouble. One man said a horse like that was bad luck, that animals wandered onto land when death followed close behind. He shrugged and kept mending wire. At night, the fire burned low, and the stars came out sharp. The horse lay down nearby now, folding itself carefully, groaning softly as it rested that bad leg. He stayed awake longer than before, listening to the quiet. More than once, he thought he heard movement beyond the fence. A truck idling far off. Voices carried by the wind that vanished when he stood to listen harder. Each sound planted a seed of unease he could not shake. The ranch had a history, though no one talked much about it. In town, he learned bits and pieces. It had once belonged to a man who bred horses, good ones, back when the land still held water and grass. That man died alone, they said. The animals were sold off cheap, the rest left to scatter.
Ow.
Over time, the place fell apart, and people stopped passing through. Stories grow in places like that, bending toward whatever fear needs feeding. One afternoon, while cleaning out the shed, he found an old halter hanging from a nail. The leather was cracked but solid. He held it for a long time before taking it outside. When he approached the horse with it, the animal froze. Its breathing quickened, eyes rolling white for a moment. He stopped right there, letting the halter hang loose in his hand. He waited until the horse settled again, until trust came back into its posture. He set the halter down and stepped away. Some things, he understood, could wait. The leg worried him most. The swelling went down a little, but the wound stayed angry and red. He cleaned it daily with water and cloth, careful not to hurt more than he helped. The horse never kicked. It trembled, but it stayed. That kind of patience did something to a man. It made him careful in ways he had not been in years. Late one evening, the sound came again. An engine closer this time. He stood by the fence, heart pounding, the horse pressing in beside him. Headlights cut across the far ridge, sweeping the land like a searchlight. They paused, then moved on. The truck did not turn toward the ranch, but it slowed enough to make his stomach knot. Whoever was out there was looking for something or someone. Sleep came hard after that. He dreamed of fences breaking and shadows moving fast across open ground. He woke before dawn to the sound of hooves shifting in the dirt, the horse restless and alert. When the sun finally rose, it revealed tire tracks along the dirt road, fresh and clear. They had passed close, closer than he liked. He went into town that day, leaving the horse in the pasture with water and what grain remained. He felt wrong about leaving, like he was breaking a promise he never spoke. In town, he listened more than he talked. At the feed store, a man mentioned a missing horse from a nearby spread, valuable even in its condition. At the diner, a woman said she had seen trucks running late at night, men not from around here asking questions. No one connected the dots out loud, but the shape of the truth began to form. When he returned, the horse stood waiting by the fence, ears forward. Relief washed through him so strong it left him dizzy. He leaned against the post and let out a breath he had been holding since morning. Whatever was coming, they were still here, still together. The days grew hotter. Dust clung to skin and clothes. The horse gained a little weight, enough that its ribs did not show quite so sharp. Its coat began to shine faintly under the dirt. Strength returned in small, stubborn ways. With it came restlessness. The horse paced at times, staring toward the hills where the road cut through. It remembered something there, something it had not outrun. One night, voices carried clear across the land. Not close enough to see, but close enough to hear. Men talking, low and tense. He crouched by the fire, keeping it small, the horse standing silent beside him. The voices faded, then returned, circling. Whoever they were, they knew the land better than strangers should. He felt the weight of the choice he had made the moment he broke that bread and held it out. He thought about leaving, about packing what little he had and driving until the road ran out. The thought lasted only a moment. He looked at the horse, at the way it leaned into his presence without knowing why, and he knew he would not go. Not now. The land that cost $75 no longer felt cheap. It felt like a line drawn in the dirt. On one side was everything he had run from. On the other was a future still unwritten, guarded by a starving horse with a scarred leg and a will that refused to break. As another distant engine growled somewhere beyond the hills, he tightened his grip on the fence and waited. Knowing the past was closing in, and that neither the land nor the horse had come to him by accident, the ranch changed the way he listened to the world. Every sound carried weight now. The wind through dry brush, the snap of a twig, the low rustle of movement beyond the fence, all felt like messages he had not yet learned how to read. He moved slower, more careful, always aware of where the horse stood and how it reacted. The animal had become his warning bell. When its ears went sharp and its body stiffened, he knew something was wrong long before his own senses caught up. The horse began to follow him everywhere. It's not close enough to crowd, but near enough to feel present. When he walked the draw, it came. When he hauled water, it limped after him. The bad leg still pained it, especially in the mornings, but pride pushed it forward. Watching that effort stirred something deep in him. He saw too much of himself in that stubborn walk, and the way the horse refused to lie down until it could no longer stand. One afternoon, while patching a section of fence near the far edge of the property, he noticed something new. Fresh boot prints pressed into the dust on the outside of the wire. They were not old, not softened by wind or time. Someone had stood there recently looking in. He followed the tracks with his eyes until they disappeared back toward the road. His chest tightened. But this was no longer just about rumors or passing trucks. Someone knew the horse was here. That night, the horse would not settle. Paced near the fire, stopping often to stare into the dark. He kept the flames low, and his movements slow. He spoke softly, not wanting to draw attention. When sleep finally came, it was shallow and broken. He dreamed of hands reaching through wire, of ropes snapping tight, of hooves striking ground in panic. He woke before dawn with sweat cooling on his skin and the sound of breathing beside him that did not belong to the horse. He reached for the flashlight, heart racing, only to find the sound came from his own chest. In town, the looks had changed. People watched him longer now, some with curiosity, others with something closer to warning. At the feed store, a man he had spoken to before leaned in and lowered his voice. Said there were men asking questions again. Said they were offering cash for information. No paperwork, no trouble if someone talked. He asked what kind of horse it was. He said valuable horses always came with problems. The kind of problems that did not care who stood in the way. He bought what he could and left without finishing his coffee. On the drive back, he checked his mirror more than once. The road stretched empty behind him, but the feeling of being followed did not fade. When the ranch came into view, relief hit him so strong he had to pull over for a moment and breathe. The horse greeted him with a low sound he had never heard before, somewhere between a nicker and a sigh. It pressed its head against his shoulder, light but steady. Rested his hand there longer than needed. Whatever else was circling this place, the bond between them was no longer accidental. It had roots now. As days passed, the horse's strength returned enough that it tested the fence, nudging posts, shifting weight. He reinforced weak spots, working until his hands blistered. He found himself thinking like a keeper rather than a drifter. He planned routes. He thought about escape paths if someone came in the night. He hid the truck behind brush, where it could not be seen easily from the road. Survival had taken on a new shape. One evening, a stranger arrived on foot. He appeared at the gate just as the sun dipped low, hands visible, posture relaxed. He called out, voice calm, asking for water. The horse stepped back immediately, ears pinned, fear flashing through its eyes. That reaction told him everything. He kept his distance and answered from where he stood, saying the well was dry. The stranger smiled, but it did not reach his eyes. He glanced past him, scanning the land too carefully for a man who only wanted a drink. After a moment, the stranger left, walking back toward the road without another word. The encounter left the air thick and sour. He did not sleep that night, sat by the fire until dawn, the horse standing close, both of them waiting for something they hoped would not come. The wound on the horse's leg flared again, red and swollen. Stress did that, he guessed. He cleaned it as best he could, murmuring apologies he did not owe. He felt responsible now in a way that scared him. If harm came to the horse, it would be because he failed to protect it. He began to wonder what the horse had been before hunger stripped it down to bone. There was strength in its frame even now, a certain intelligence in its eyes. This was no ordinary ranch horse. Whatever past it carried had value to someone, and that value had teeth. The land itself seemed to sense the pressure building. The wind shifted often. Storm clouds gathered and broke without rain. Nights grew restless. He found old markers near the back of the property, half-buried stones that suggested boundaries long argued over. This ranch had always been contested, always been something people wanted or fought over, even when they called it worthless. One morning, he woke to find part of the fence cut clean through. It's not broken. Cut. The horse stood on the inside, shaking, refusing to go near the opening. Cold anger settled into his bones. This was no longer about chance. Someone was testing him, testing how far they could go. He repaired the fence and added wire from the shed, hands steady despite the fear gnawing at him. As he worked, a question pressed harder with every twist of metal. How long could he hold this line alone? A letter arrived that afternoon, left tucked under a rock near the gate. No name, no return address. Just a few words written sharp and clean. Said he had something that did not belong to him. It said there would be consequences if he did not do the right thing. Read it twice, then folded it carefully and burned it in the fire. The horse watched the flames, ears low, as if it understood. He thought about calling for help, about lawmen, paperwork, explanations. But he also knew how things worked in places like this. The kind of men who hunted in the dark often had longer reach than rules. And he knew deep down that the horse would be gone before any one official arrived. So he stayed quiet. He moved at night, shifting the horse between pasture and draw, keeping its presence uncertain. He slept in short stretches, always listening. His world narrowed to this land, this animal, and the invisible line drawn around them. From time to time, he caught glimpses of movement on the ridge, figures outlined against the sky, never staying long. Once he heard a whistle carried by the wind, sharp and deliberate. The horse reared at the sound, panic breaking through its calm. It took him a long time to settle it again. The past pressed closer with each passing day. Whatever life the horse had escaped was not done reaching for it.
Oh.
And whatever future he had hoped for on this cheap land now stood balanced on a thin edge. As another storm gathered without rain and the night filled with uneasy silence, he stood by the fence with the horse at his side, knowing the conflict had only begun and that the choice he made next would shape more than just his own fate. The nights grew heavier, as if the dark itself had learned to wait. He felt it in his bones when the sun slipped behind the hills, a pressure that settled over the ranch and refused to lift until morning. The horse sensed it too. Its sleep came in short bursts, head lifting at every distant sound. The bond between them had tightened into something wordless and strong, built from shared fear and shared patience. They were no longer two separate lives crossing by chance. They were a pair holding ground. He began preparing without fully admitting it to himself. He stacked old boards near the shed, not as weapons, but as barriers. He cleared brush near the fence line, so nothing could hide too close. He marked trails through the draw that only he and the horse knew, quiet paths where hoof and boot left little trace. Every move was slow and deliberate. Panic had no place here. Panic made mistakes. The horse surprised him one morning by stepping cleanly over a low rail, favoring the injured leg but steady. Strength was returning in ways that mattered. The animal was still thin, still scarred, but there was power under the skin now, a reminder of what it once had been and could be again. It felt a surge of pride that had nothing to do with ownership. It was the pride of seeing something broken refuse to stay that way. Word from town grew sharper. A woman at the diner warned him without looking up from her coffee. She said the men asking about the horse were not patient ones. She said money changed hands quickly when answers did not come freely. Another man mentioned a breeding operation that had gone bad. Deals made off record. Animals moved where they should not have been. Valuable stock disappeared sometimes. Not stolen, just redirected. Until someone started asking questions they did not like. He listened and nodded, his face calm, his thoughts racing. The picture forming in his mind was not complete, but it was clear enough to know he stood in the middle of something larger than himself. The horse was not just an animal someone missed. It was proof. Proof of a trail that led places people wanted kept quiet. Back at the ranch, he found more signs. Fresh tracks near the spring, a crushed cigarette but near the fence. Someone had been close again, close enough to watch. He felt anger rise, hot and sudden, then forced it down. Anger made noise. Silence kept you alive. That evening, clouds rolled in, thick and low. The air smelled of rain that never quite arrived. He led the horse into the draw, away from the open pasture, keeping to shadow. They moved together now with ease, each anticipating the other. When the first engine noise broke the quiet, it was closer than ever before. Headlights cut across the land, slow and searching. He pressed the horse still, one hand on its neck, feeling the rapid beat of its heart. The truck stopped near the gate. Doors opened. Voices carried low and confident. These were not men asking anymore. These were men expecting. They walked the fence line, testing posts, shining lights into corners. One laughed softly, the sound sharp in the night. Another said the place was emptier than it looked. He stayed crouched in the draw, breath shallow, counting steps by sound alone. When the beam of light passed over the brush near them, the horse tensed, muscles coiling. He whispered calm into its ear, his own fear a steady burn. The men moved on after a while, not satisfied but not ready to push yet. The truck drove off slow, as if making a promise to return. He stayed hidden long after the sound faded, until the night settled back into uneasy quiet. When he finally led the horse back toward the shack, his legs shook from the release of held tension. Sleep did not come. He sat by the cold fire, watching the horse breathe, and knew the next visit would not be cautious. Whatever they wanted, they would come for it soon. The following days felt like borrowed time. He pushed himself harder, gathering supplies, reinforcing the draw. He made a decision he had avoided thinking through. If it came to it, they would leave. Not the road, not the obvious way. There was an old trail through the hills, barely passable, one he had spotted while walking the far ridge. It led toward open land, toward places where a horse could disappear if it needed to. The horse seemed to understand the urgency. It stayed close, moved when he moved, trusted without question. The wound on its leg improved enough that it no longer favored it as much. Watching that healing felt like watching hope take shape. Another letter appeared, this one heavier in tone. It warned that patience was over, suggested consequences that did not need to be written down. He burned it like the first, jaw tight, hand steady. Fear had a voice, but he did not have to answer it. The final warning came without paper. Late one afternoon, dust rose on the road long before the truck came into view. This time there was no attempt at subtlety. The engine roared, confidence loud and clear. He led the horse into the draw before the truck even stopped, heart hammering, every sense alive. Voices followed, closer, louder. They cut the fence this time without hesitation. He waited until the moment felt right, then moved. He guided the horse through the narrow path he had cleared, brush closing behind them. The sound of pursuit came fast, shouts, footsteps, the crack of branches. The horse pushed forward, pain ignored, will carrying it through. They reached the ridge as the sun dipped low, painting the land in golden shadow. Below them, the ranch lay open and exposed, a place that had held them but could no longer keep them safe. He did not look back. The horse did, ears pinned, then surged ahead. The trail narrowed, winding through stone and scrub. The sounds behind them faded, then returned uneven and frustrated. The men did not know this land the way he did now. They had not listened to it. They had not learned its quiet paths. As night fell, the wind picked up, carrying dust and confusion. He slowed the horse only when he had to, speaking softly, guiding it through the hardest parts. Each step forward felt like defiance. Each breath felt earned. Somewhere ahead lay uncertainty, and beyond that, maybe freedom. He did not know how it would end. He only knew that the horse chose him once, starving and afraid, and he would not fail that choice now. Behind them, the voices grew distant. Ahead, the land opened wide, dark and waiting. The climax of everything they had run from and everything they hoped for hung just beyond the next rise. He tightened his grip on the reins he had fashioned from old rope, leaned forward and pressed on, knowing that whatever came next would decide whether this old American land would finally give something back instead of taking it away. The trail carried them through the hills until the night thinned and the first gray light of morning touched the sky. By then, the sounds of pursuit were gone. No engines, no voices. Only the wind moving through brush and the slow, steady rhythm of hooves on dirt. We stopped near a shallow rise where the land dipped into a wide basin, hidden from the road by stone and scrub. The horse lowered its head and breathed deep, sides heaving, sweat darkening its coat. He leaned against its neck, eyes closed, letting the moment pass through him. They were still standing. That was enough. They rested there through the morning. He found water in a narrow wash and let the horse drink its fill. The leg held. Not perfect, not healed, but strong enough. He felt a quiet pride again, the kind that did not need witnesses. When the sun climbed higher, he made a choice that surprised even him. They would not keep running. Running gave the past too much power. They would return, but not the same way, and not alone. By afternoon, he reached a small town on the far side of the hills, one that lived on passing trade and kept its doors open to strangers. He left the horse in a shaded corral behind a feed store and walked straight to the sheriff's office. He told the story plain, without anger or drama. Talked about the ranch, the cut fences, the letters, the men and trucks. He showed the marks on his hands, the photos he had taken of tracks and wire, the careful notes he had kept when he sensed trouble. He talked about the horse and its condition when it arrived, about the care he had given. He did not ask for sympathy. He asked for help. The sheriff listened. He had seen this kind of thing before, though not often spoken out loud. Deals made off books, pressure used instead of paperwork. When a valuable animal crossed the wrong path, men with money tried to straighten it quietly. The sheriff made calls. He asked questions of his own. This time, someone was ready to listen. They returned to the ranch together 2 days later, the sheriff's truck leading the way. The land looked the same as ever, dry and quiet, but it felt different, less like a trap, more like a place that could breathe again. The men who had circled it were not there. Word travels fast when the rules change. The investigation moved slow, but it moved. The horse's past came into focus, piece by piece. It had been part of a breeding operation run hard and pushed too far. When records did not line up and inspectors came close, the horse was meant to vanish. Instead, it escaped. Hunger carried it across open land until it reached a fire and a man who still believed in stopping when something needed help. Ownership was sorted clean and legal. No quiet deals, no threats. The horse was cleared, its papers rewritten in a way that told the truth. The ranch, worthless by rumor and cheap by price, became something else entirely. A place where a line had been held. The horse healed with time and care. The leg knit together slowly, leaving a scar that told its story without shame. Strength returned in full, muscle filling out under a coat that shone in the sun. Watching that change felt like watching a season turn. He named the horse only after it no longer needed saving, choosing a simple name that fit the land and the way the animal moved through it. Life settled into a rhythm again, this one earned. He fixed the well with help from town. Water returned to the land, thin but steady. Grass followed. The fences stood straight. People stopped laughing when they drove by. Some waved. Few stopped to talk. The ranch that cost $75 became proof that worth was not always tied to price. The horse became known not as a prize or a secret, but as a survivor. Children came to see it. Old ranchers nodded with approval. The land began to carry a different kind of story. One passed quietly, the way the best ones always are. On warm evenings, he sat by the fire again, the horse standing close, not out of fear now, but habit and trust. The stars felt kinder overhead. The wind no longer carried warning. He thought about how close he had come to walking away, and how much he would have lost if he had. The past still existed. It always would. But it no longer chased him through the dark. He had faced it, named it, and watched it back down. In its place stood something stronger. A future built not on running, but on choosing to stay. When people asked why he had bought a worthless ranch, he smiled and said it was the only thing he could afford. He never mentioned the starving horse that chose him, or the nights filled with fear, or the thin line between loss and hope. Some stories mattered more when they were lived than when they were told. The land rested easy now, so did the man. And beside him, the horse lowered its head to graze, free and steady, a quiet reminder that sometimes the smallest choices, made at the right moment, could turn dust into home and fear into something that finally knew how to let go.